She didn't ask his name. She didn't scan his ticket. She just looked at his skin and decided, "You don't belong here." First class fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. A man lowered his newspaper. A woman clutched her pearls. But the black man at the center of it all? He bent down, picked up his torn boarding pass and calmly took his seat. He said nothing, but inside he had already made the decision. In just 10 minutes, this plane wouldn't just be grounded. He'd bring the entire airline to its knees. If you've ever been humiliated quietly, if you've ever had your place questioned for the way you look instead of who you are, this story is for you. Tell your story in the comments. Like, subscribe, and get ready, because what happens next will shake you to your core. Julian Carter had built empires by staying silent at the right moments, the kind of silence that didn't retreat, it studied, observed, calculated. That's why when Kristen Walsh, lead flight attendant on Apex Air Flight 227, looked him up and down and tore his platinum boarding pass in half without a second glance, Julian didn't raise his voice. He simply bent down, picked up the two halves of his ticket, and took his seat in 2A. The moment was surgical, controlled, devastating. The first-class cabin fell quiet. Businessmen paused mid-email. A woman clutched the stem of her champagne flute. Flight 227 hadn't left the gate at Miami International, but something had already shifted. Tension hummed in the air, not from turbulence, but from disbelief. Kristen, arms crossed and smirking, didn't care. "Wrong section," she said. "Try economy, or whatever seat people like you can afford." She hadn't checked his name, hadn't scanned his pass. She just saw a well-dressed black man and made a decision. Julian didn't flinch. Inside, however, he was already moving, not physically, but strategically. His mind was pulling up the digital framework he had personally architected for the airline's back-end system. He knew exactly how many nodes were needed to initiate an emergency shareholder override. He also knew Kristen's name, her internal ID, her pattern of behavior, logged in incident reports ignored by HR. He had warned Apex Air 3 times about their cultural rot. Now, they'd ignored him for the last time. A woman seated beside Julian leaned closer. Blonde, designer glasses, Chanel coat. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "If you'd like to switch with me, sweetheart, I think you'd be more comfortable in the back." She smiled, feigning kindness but confirming Kristen's message. Julian turned slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. He still said nothing. As Julian Carter sat motionless in seat 2A, the hum of the plane grew louder, not from its engines, but from the growing tension in the cabin. Around him, first-class passengers whispered nervously, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Kristen Walsh still hovered nearby, tapping on her crew tablet like a soldier gripping a weapon, but Julian remained still, like a lion that knew the cage door had just been unlocked. He glanced once at Evan Brooks, his tech assistant seated further back, blending in with the passengers. Evan gave the faintest nod. The plan was already in motion. Kristen leaned over again, tapping the control panel on Julian's seat. Instantly, the recline failed. The reading light shut off. Even the call button stopped responding. "Malfunctioning seat," she announced with rehearsed ease. "Safety protocol. We may need to move you." Julian turned his head slowly, locking eyes with her for the first time. "You've disabled every feature of this seat," he said evenly. "But not the one that matters." She blinked, confused. "Excuse me, my presence." Before she could respond, a voice from row 4 cut through the air. "That's all on video," said a young man holding up his phone. Noah Reed, an independent documentary vlogger. His lens was locked on Kristen's face. "Ma'am," he called, loud enough for the entire cabin, "are you disabling this man's seat because of a malfunction, or because he's black?" Murmurs rippled across the rows. Kristen's face tightened. Across the aisle, another phone was already broadcasting live. Mia Zhang, a social media influencer with over 1 million followers, typed into her feed, "Apex Air caught live, just Julian Gate." Kristen's composure began to falter. She turned sharply. "Phones down, or we'll call security." But the damage had already been done. At the rear, a woman stepped out of the economy lavatory and paused just long enough to meet Julian's eyes. She gave the faintest nod before continuing forward. It was Isabel Gomez, Vanguard's head of ethics, traveling incognito. She didn't speak, but her message was clear. They were watching, they were recording, and Apex Air had just made the worst mistake of its corporate life. From his seat in 2A, Julian Carter stared straight ahead, the picture of composure. Yet beneath that surface calm, gears were turning with precision. This was no longer a flight. It was a live event, a case study, a reckoning in progress. Kristen Walsh, now visibly uneasy, leaned toward him again, waving her tablet like a shield. "Your ticket doesn't scan. System shows void. You're not on this manifest," she said. Julian didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly reached into his charcoal blazer and pulled out a sleek metallic card, the Platinum Apex Air membership, engraved with his initials. He held it up silently. Kristen scoffed. "This doesn't mean anything." That's when a voice from the front galley interrupted. "Actually, it means quite a lot." Evan Brooks stepped forward, tablet in hand, his Vanguard badge now visible. Calm, professional, and unmistakably authorized. He handed his device to Julian. Kristen narrowed her eyes. "What is that? Some kind of complaint form?" Julian tapped the screen 3 times and rotated it toward her. "This is my seat, my flight." A pause. "And my company." A beat of silence. Then Diane Heller, the smug equity tycoon seated in 2C, leaned toward Kristen and whispered with venom, "Some people don't belong here. We both know it." Her hand slipped a folded envelope into Kristen's palm. A bribe, smooth, practiced, but Noah Reed's camera didn't miss a beat. It captured everything. Kristen's fingers closing over the envelope, Diane's cold smirk, Julian's quiet dignity. Mia's livestream exploded. Bribe caught on camera. Black CEO humiliated. Watch this. The feed had gone viral. Kristen turned pale. Then, from the back of the plane, Isabel Gomez pressed send. Footage, passenger manifest, internal logs, 3 journalists, 4 Vanguard board members, 1 crisis PR firm, all in seconds. Kristen stepped closer to Julian. "You're not in the system. I don't care what badge you wave." Julian didn't respond. He didn't need to, because just then, Evan leaned in again. "Chairman Holt is on a secure line. Isabel's logs confirmed digital tampering. Tyler manipulated the manifest." Julian gave a slight nod. "Stand by. Phase Sigma in 90 seconds. Suddenly, the cabin Wi-Fi surged. Premium bandwidth for everyone. Every device buzzed. Notifications flooded in. On Mia's feed, 12,000 new viewers joined within seconds. A reckoning was coming, not from above, but from the seat they tried to erase. Julian Carter never stood. He didn't have to. The empire was already shifting beneath them. The atmosphere in the cabin thickened as reality began to sink in. Kristen Walsh, once in control, now flicked through her crew tablet with increasing desperation. "Mr. Carter's seat has been flagged as cancelled," she announced, holding up the screen to another attendant, Tyler Quinn. Tyler barely looked. "Confirmed." He nodded, but the confirmation wasn't based on system checks. It was based on blind loyalty and fear. Just a week ago, Tyler had been ranting about Vanguard's acquisition, calling it a diversity stunt. And now, as fate would have it, he was standing in front of the very man behind that change, Julian Carter. Diane Heller wasn't silent either. She leaned toward Kristen again, smug as ever. "Make it worth your while," she whispered, referring to the bribe already passed. The implication was clear. Wealth protects its own. But what Diane didn't know was that Noah Reed's camera was zoomed in again, capturing every whispered betrayal, every fold of the envelope now tucked into Kristen's pocket. And in the aisle seat, Mia Zhang's livestream hit 500,000 viewers. "Just witnessed a bribe. A black CEO. A viral takedown," she narrated to her followers. Isabel Gomez, calm as ever in the economy section, routed the footage directly to Apex Air's ethics compliance, titled "Urgent Breach of Federal Protocol." Her second email, sent straight to Chairman Holt, titled "Time to Move." Meanwhile, Kristen, completely unaware of the web closing in, leaned in again toward Julian. "I'll need to ask you to disembark. Security has been notified." Julian blinked once. "On what grounds?" Tyler stepped forward, nervously clutching his tablet. "System mismatch. We think the manifest was corrupted. Happens all the time." But Julian had built that manifest system. He knew every line of code, every protocol. This wasn't a glitch, it was sabotage. Across the aisle, a man in 3A finally stood. "This isn't about a mistake," he said. "It's harassment." A soft murmur rose in the cabin. People weren't just noticing, they were reacting. Then, in a calculated move, Kristen accidentally spilled a cup of water on Julian's lap. "Oops," she said with mock concern. "These things happen." Julian calmly took a napkin, dried his hand, and said coldly, "This plane has a leak far worse than that cup." And then, everything changed. From the back, Isabel triggered the emergency override. Julian Carter's seat was reinstated, the forged cancellations erased. At the same time, she flagged Tyler's digital tampering and attached screenshots of unauthorized access to FAA regulators and DOJ compliance teams. Evan leaned in again. "Chairman Holt is live. NBC just broke the story." Julian nodded. "Activate projection." From the cabin ceiling, a hidden projector dropped down and lit up. On the screen, the Vanguard boardroom, live. Executives now stared directly into the cabin, watching Julian Carter calmly seated in 2A. The coup wasn't coming. It had already begun. As the projector cast the live shareholder meeting above the aisle, silence swept through the cabin like a wave, crashing into brittle certainty. Kristen Walsh looked up, her mouth slightly ajar. The screen showed Vanguard board members adjusting ties, flipping through documents, and most importantly, watching her. Julian didn't move. He didn't speak. His silence, more commanding than any scream, filled the void Kristen once ruled. "Mr. Carter's seat has been marked as cancelled." Kristen tried once more, desperation creeping into her voice. She rotated her device again toward the flight crew. "It's the system." But Tyler Quinn, the tech ops attendant, was no longer a shield. Isabel had already overruled his access. His screen now flashed "Access revoked, system override" in glaring red. He slumped slightly, beads of sweat now trailing down his neck. Julian's voice finally emerged, calm and surgical. "You've manipulated a federally regulated manifest. You've falsified cancellation records, and you've done so with the arrogance of someone who never expected to be challenged." NBC's live ticker confirmed it. Breaking: Black CEO targeted mid-flight. Apex under investigation. From her seat, Diane Heller tried to distance herself. "You're overreacting," she scoffed. "This isn't criminal, it's company policy." Julian turned his head slightly. "Is bribing crew company policy?" Noah Reed's camera zoomed again, now capturing Diane, pulling her designer scarf higher over her mouth. Beside her, Mia spoke softly into her phone. He never even raised his voice. That's what makes this more powerful. In the back galley, Isabel triggered another override. Tyler's tampering logs, time-stamped and authenticated, were uploaded to FAA compliance systems and shared with legal teams across 3 partner firms. Simultaneously, Evan tapped into the internal crew interface and launched a visual poll on the projector. "Immediate termination. Flight 237 crew review." It listed 3 names: Kristen Walsh, lead flight attendant Tyler Quinn, tech operations Diane Heller, private equity guest, ad hoc advisor next to each, a green voting checkmark, and a countdown. Kristen lunged forward. "You can't do this. This isn't protocol." Julian didn't even look at her. "It's not a trial. It's a correction." Moments later, Isabel's voice came through the cabin speakers. "Majority shareholder vote confirmed. Terminations effective immediately." Kristen stood frozen. Tyler collapsed into the jump seat, his screen lifeless. Diane opened her mouth to protest, but saw the camera lenses pointed straight at her. She fell silent. Applause broke out, not chaotic, but deliberate. A recognition of something seismic, something overdue. From the front galley, Michael Brennan, the cabin manager, stepped forward. "Perhaps we can move this to a more private setting," he offered meekly. Julian finally rose. "No," he said, "this is the setting, and this is the meeting your board never thought would reach this cabin." He stood tall, not in confrontation, but in confirmation. The projector screen above now showed live shareholder metrics, including Julian Carter's ownership stake, Vanguard Enterprises, 51% Apex Air Holdings. People gasped. One woman whispered, "He owns it." Julian turned to the cabin. "You made passengers feel small. You weaponized policy, and now policy is correcting you." He returned to his seat and gave a nod to Evan. "Phase Sigma. Full shutdown. Begin now." As Julian Carter leaned back into seat 2A, a notification echoed softly across every screen in the cabin. "Apex Air. Operational shutdown in progress." Passengers looked around in disbelief. Flight attendants froze. In the terminal outside, gate agents stared at blinking monitors now flashing. "Flight 227, cancelled by majority stakeholder." Fleet grounding initiated. Inside the aircraft, a woman in 3C whispered, "Is this real? Can he actually shut the airline down?" Julian didn't answer. He didn't need to. The proof was unfolding on every device, every alert, every monitor. Evan leaned in beside him, whispering updates. Fleet command acknowledged. Wi-Fi stabilization complete. FAA ping received. And then he tapped once more. A press releases just hit. Vanguard Beta is live. Julian's tablet now displayed a slick black screen titled Air Vigil, Real-Time AI Discrimination Monitor. While Apex Air collapsed, Julian's new platform was already taking off. A system built not to punish, but to prevent, to track, document, and expose systemic discrimination across the travel industry in real time. No media spin, no internal reviews, no loopholes. Isabel's voice crackled into Julian's earpiece. "Downloads crossing 1.8 million. Department of Transportation wants a call." Julian nodded. "Tell them we'll make it open source. Accountability shouldn't be proprietary." The ripple effect had begun. From LAX to LaGuardia, flights labeled Apex were being delayed. Internal staff dashboards at headquarters were now locked by a firewall protocol titled Vanguard Override. Operations managers scrambled, but it was too late. Julian's system was already rewriting theirs. In the cabin, Tyler Quinn stared at his frozen tablet. The last message he received before being locked out read, "Access denied. Violation code. Data tampering." He slumped further into his seat, pale and silent. Kristen, still clinging to her last thread of authority, turned to Julian. "This is revenge," she spat. "You're humiliating us because we humiliated you." Julian tilted his head calmly. "No, I'm holding you accountable because no one ever did." He stood again, not to posture, but to face every passenger in the cabin. "My name is Julian Carter. I am the CEO of Vanguard Enterprises, and as of today, I'm the majority owner of Apex Air." The cabin sat, stunned. He continued, voice unwavering, "This flight doesn't just land, it lands with purpose. The days of invisible discrimination, of quiet cruelty disguised as policy, are over." A voice from the overhead speaker cut in. Chairman Gregory Holt from Vanguard's boardroom. "I confirm the immediate termination of Kristen Walsh and Tyler Quinn, effective with cause, and Diane Heller is hereby banned from all Apex flights pending ethics review." Murmurs turned into gasps, then silence, not the silence of fear, but of reckoning, of reset, of respect. Passengers began to applaud, not wildly, but slowly, like jurors delivering justice, like witnesses to a system finally held accountable. Noah Reed whispered into his phone. He never raised his voice, but he grounded an entire airline. Julian turned to Evan. "Let's make it public." Evan tapped the final command. Flight Truth, a mobile whistleblower tool, went live seconds later. Passengers across the country began receiving alerts. Have you been profiled, ignored, mistreated while flying? Report it anonymously. We're listening now. Kristen stood near the galley, frozen. Her badge was gone, her screen dark, her voice useless. Julian passed her on his way back to his seat. You wore a uniform to hide entitlement. I wore silence to build infrastructure. We are not the same. The world outside was changing, and the cabin knew it. The moment Julian Carter returned to seat 2A, a subtle hum buzzed across the entire cabin, not from the engines, but from history shifting in real time. Across terminals in Atlanta, Dallas, JFK, and O'Hare, flight boards flickered. Apex Air, operational hold. All non-emergency flights suspended. Stakeholder action shut down in effect. Inside Flight 227, a man in seat 1D looked down at his phone, then slowly turned to his wife. I think we just lived through something they'll write books about. But the revolution wasn't limited to Apex Air. Within 15 minutes, airline stocks began dipping. Internal messages leaked to Reddit and X, formerly Twitter. Whistleblowers across the industry started posting receipts, voice recordings, and screenshots. And one message kept repeating, Air Vigil is watching. In Silicon Valley, tech blogs exploded with headlines. Vanguard CEO unveils AI oversight platform during mid-flight takedown. This isn't revenge, it's reform in real time. From within the cabin, passengers began speaking out, some through tears, others through live streams. Mia Zhang, the influencer with over 1 million followers, spoke softly to her audience. I've been offered champagne in first class, smiles, perks, but I've never seen truth this loud without a single shout. This man just showed us how change happens, with clarity, not chaos. In economy, Isabel Gomez smiled faintly. Her quiet nod to Julian had become a digital earthquake. Her footage had reached 6 major media outlets and been confirmed by legal teams across Vanguard's subsidiaries. Noah Reid turned to the camera one last time. He didn't cancel this flight to punish them. He paused an entire industry to rebuild it. Back in the cockpit, the captain received a digital directive from Apex Air's board. Flight will not proceed. All crew relieved of operational duty pending review. He turned to his co-pilot, eyes wide. I've flown 22 years, never seen anything like this. On the ground, networks scrambled. CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox cut into programming. Breaking, Black CEO grounds entire airline. Corporate racism exposed. Kristen Walsh sat silently now, no longer the one making announcements. Her last words had been swallowed by a system louder than her voice. Proof. Tyler stared at the dark screen of his locked tablet, the final message glowing faintly in red. Access permanently revoked. Digital tampering under investigation. Julian remained calm. This wasn't about punishing individuals. It was about tearing out the roots of a pattern long protected by silence, by policy, by plausible deniability. And now even the plausible had been dismantled. Julian leaned toward Evan. What's the response from the Department of Transportation? Evan blinked. They want to integrate Air Vigil, National Infrastructure Partnership. Julian nodded once. Good. Let's make the code open source. Buyers shouldn't be hidden in a firewall. From coast to coast, business schools paused lectures to analyze the event. Ethicists called it a masterclass in surgical disruption. Twitter trended, "True power in silence." Julian Carter, no more glitches. Even financial analysts took note. Vanguard's stock spiked. Apex Air's boardroom received an unprecedented number of shareholder inquiries asking, how did we let this happen? But Julian didn't gloat. He watched quietly as the engine of accountability roared to life. From his seat he pulled out a final folder, not digital but handwritten, titled The New Culture Manifesto. He began writing as passengers watched. Not for PR, not for optics, but for policy. Not reactive policy, preventative. Kristen finally spoke, voice hollow. This is overkill. Julian glanced toward her, expression unreadable. No, this is overdue. And as that single page filled with ideas, frameworks, and non-negotiables, a new airline culture was being born. Not in a boardroom, but in the wreckage of arrogance. It would fly again, but not until it had learned to land with integrity. The fallout wasn't chaos. It was orchestration, precise, intentional, and irreversible. Within 36 hours, Apex Air's entire global fleet was grounded. At LAX, flight attendants who once mimicked Kristen's tone now sat in HR debriefings, reviewing leaked footage. At Heathrow, Apex's legal team scrambled to contain liability, and in Miami, at the very gate where Flight 227 remained parked, press vans swarmed as if royalty had landed, but inside, Julian Carter didn't flinch. He wasn't waiting for applause, he was setting precedent. When he finally stepped off the aircraft, reporters shouted questions. He gave none. Just a nod to Evan, who handed them a press packet with a single headline: "We don't apologize, we restructure." That quote became iconic. It was printed in Wired the Atlantic and projected onto a Times Square billboard by a civil rights non-profit within 48 hours. Julian's AI platform, AirVigil, now had over 3.8 million downloads. Passengers from Delta, United, even European carriers began uploading their own stories. Quiet removals, unscanned tickets, reassigned seats after malfunctions. Suddenly, it wasn't just one airline on trial, it was an industry. Senators called for hearings. The Secretary of Transportation offered a national ethics grant. Julian declined the money, but offered something better: the codebase. "It should never be proprietary to protect people," he said. "It should be public, like fire exits." Back at Apex Air headquarters, boardroom meetings no longer began with stock projections, but with ethics briefings. A new internal division was created: Passenger Integrity Operations, led by none other than Isabel Gomez. Her first act? Retrofitting every crew tablet with bias detection software. No more glitches. No more plausible deniability. Meanwhile, Noah Reid was offered a 6-figure contract to film the first documentary about corporate bias correction in real time. He refused. "This story doesn't need narration," he said. The silence spoke loud enough. Kristen Walsh, once the gatekeeper of first class, was now the face of unethical conduct. A meme of her holding the torn boarding pass trended for weeks with captions like, "Tore the ticket, triggered a takeover." One bad attitude grounded 274 flights. She filed a defamation suit. It was dismissed in 9 minutes. Tyler Quinn, meanwhile, faced federal review for database tampering. His defense? "I was just following the culture." That line became infamous. Julian Carter gave one public interview 5 days later. It aired at midnight, unannounced, streamed without ads. No studio, no script, just a dark room, one chair, one camera. He said, "I've been told all my life to act like I belong. That's the wrong question. The better one is, what happens when we build systems that stop assuming we don't?" That clip went viral, not for drama, but for clarity. People began using the term Julian moment to describe the tipping point when silence ends and structure answers. By the end of the month, Vanguard's shareholding in Apex increased to 66%. Apex's CEO stepped down. 3 competing airlines preemptively adopted Julian's AirVigil framework, and Apex's training manuals were rewritten from the ground up. The new front page began not with passenger policy, but with a statement: "Bias is not a glitch, it's a breach." And in universities, boardrooms, and even police academies, Julian's silent revolt was being taught, not as revenge, but as a model, a new standard, a system that no longer waited for outrage to act, but moved at the speed of truth. As Julian Carter remained seated in 2A, a quiet authority radiated from his stillness. Around him, the cabin felt transformed, not just physically, but morally, as if a kind of cleansing had taken place. Kristen sat hunched in the crew jump seat, no longer barking orders or issuing threats, but silently absorbing the weight of her consequences. Tyler stared blankly at his screen, now permanently locked by Isabel's override. And Diane? Her once proud posture was gone, replaced by a shrinking presence like a relic in the wrong century. Passengers had long stopped whispering. Instead, they watched, phones in hand, not for spectacle but for documentation, recording history as it was being made. Julian tapped once more on his device, and the screen above the cabin showed a message in bold letters: "Transparency begins now." It faded into the sleek interface of a platform titled Flight Truth. This was the final piece of his reform vision, a real-time public feedback and whistleblower system for tracking discrimination across air travel networks. Anonymous, decentralized, immutable. At that moment, the media outside was already ablaze. CNN, MSNBC, BBC, all carried the story. Headlines read, "Black CEO grounds airline over racial profiling, the 10-minute boardroom revolution." Julian Carter, the man who silenced discrimination without a word. Julian turned to Evan and said calmly, "Push the federal integration proposal." With a nod, Evan executed the command. Within seconds, an encrypted invite landed on the desk of the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. The message was clear: integrate Flight Truth into the National Aviation Monitoring System, or explain to the public why not. Isabel, seated quietly in economy, whispered into her earpiece, "Press outlets want a comment." Julian replied without turning, "Let the platform speak for itself." Suddenly, the final screen changed one last time. A new window opened on every passenger's tablet and phone, a message written in clean, minimalist font. "If you've ever felt erased at 30,000 feet, now your story can land somewhere that matters." It was signed with a single line: Julian Carter, CEO, Vanguard Enterprises. A soft hush fell over the aircraft again, not from fear, but reverence. From the jump seat, Kristen opened her mouth to speak, but there was nothing left to say. Her authority had been dismantled, not with shouting, but with structure. Her habits, once protected by the silence of corporate immunity, now lived in case studies and compliance systems. Flight 227 hadn't just carried passengers that day, it had carried a revolution. The aircraft had become a courtroom, the aisle, a stage, and Julian, he wasn't just the CEO anymore, he was the reform.